My freeloading brother tried to trap me into a $20,000 down payment after telling a bank I'd co-sign. I refused. Now his credit's wrecked, the house deal's dead, and everyone still talks about the meltdown he had at dinner. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I'm always curious to see how far these stories reach. Now let's get into it. My name is Elena Parker, but everyone calls me Lena. I'm in my early 30s and I work as a nurse. It's a job that drains me some days, but it also gives me a sense of purpose. I've always been the responsible one, the one who pays her bills on time, builds up her savings slowly, and thinks twice before spending money on things I don't need. My brother Caleb, on the other hand, is the opposite. He's 28, and if I'm being brutally honest, he's been coasting through life on other people's patience and generosity since high school. Caleb has always lived paycheck to paycheck, bouncing between jobs, roommates, and girlfriends. If he had a little extra cash, it never lasted. He'd spend it on gadgets, weekends out, or whatever new hobby caught his eye. Whenever he got himself into a corner, he leaned on family, usually me, to help him out. I'd lent him money before, small amounts I never saw again, and my mom always begged me to be patient with him. That was the story of our household growing up. Our parents were strict, but they had this strange double standard. I was expected to do everything right, study hard, get a stable job, carry myself with dignity. Caleb, though? He was babied. Mom made excuses for him constantly, brushed off his failures, and insisted he just needed a little more time to figure things out. Dad didn't coddle him, but he wasn't really around enough to correct the imbalance either. So, it fell on me to hold things together while Caleb got away with being reckless. I thought by the time we were both adults, things might balance out. I assumed Caleb would eventually realize life doesn't hand you things for free, that he'd grow up and take responsibility. But the older we got, the clearer it became that he wasn't going to change. He wasn't just careless. He'd learned to twist situations so he came out ahead, even if it meant leaving me to carry the burden. And as much as I wanted to believe family should stick together, I was starting to realize that blind loyalty had a cost. I didn't know it yet, but his next scheme would be the boldest one yet, and it would drag me into a mess I never agreed to be part of. It started with Caleb tossing the idea around like it was nothing, slipping it into conversations the way someone might mention the weather. One night over dinner, with plates still full and everyone half listening, he leaned back in his chair and said he'd been thinking about buying a house. He didn't just say it casually. He said it with that tone, the one that begged for attention, as if he were laying out a plan for the future that everyone should admire. He painted it like some grand vision, calling it his shot at stability. He dropped buzzwords about roots, community, and the pride of owning something of his own. The way he spoke made it sound like he was chasing a noble dream, the kind people rally behind. But beneath it, I heard the sharp edges. He wasn't just talking about himself. He was setting the stage, and I could feel my name hovering in the background before he even said it. Sure enough, he turned the spotlight my way. He mentioned how some families pool their resources, how siblings support each other because that's what family is for. He didn't outright ask, not yet, but he made it clear he saw me as part of his blueprint. He slipped in lines about me being the steady one, the person who could make things possible. Everyone around the table chuckled, treating it like harmless talk, and I forced a laugh too, brushing it off as one of his typical schemes that never went anywhere. But Caleb didn't stop there. Later, when it was just the two of us, he circled back. His tone was different this time, less dreamy, more calculated. He leaned against the counter like we were in some negotiation and told me I'd had advantages he never did. He said I owed it to him to level the playing field. "You've always had it easier than me," he muttered, as if my hard work was just luck that needed redistributing. He spoke like he was appealing to fairness, but it was nothing more than guilt disguised as logic. I remember standing there, unsure how far he'd take it. The casual talk over dinner had turned into something heavier, something with teeth. It wasn't just chatter anymore. It was pressure, dressed up as family duty. And while I laughed it off again, inside I felt the shift, like he'd already started building a trap I couldn't yet see. The call came in the middle of a quiet afternoon. I almost ignored the unknown number, but something made me pick up. A man introduced himself as Mr. Ridley, speaking in that careful, professional tone bankers use when they're confirming details. He thanked me for moving forward so quickly with the co-signed loan application. For a second, I thought he had the wrong person. I asked him to repeat what he'd just said, and my stomach dropped as he rattled off Caleb's name, the property address, and my supposed role in the process. I cut him off, telling him there must be a mistake because I hadn't signed anything. There was a pause on his end, like he was recalibrating. Then he said Caleb had listed me as his co-signer and that my information was already in their system. The words barely registered. My pulse was hammering in my ears. I asked him to clarify again, certain I was misunderstanding. But no, according to their files, I was tied to a mortgage application I'd never even seen. I gripped the phone tighter, forcing myself not to explode. My voice shook as I asked for copies of every document with my name on it. He agreed to send them immediately. When the email came through, I opened it with trembling hands. There it was, my name printed neatly beside Caleb's, as if I had been sitting across from him signing paperwork. Only I hadn't. He had volunteered me, like my credit and my savings were just pieces on his chessboard. I hadn't given a single word of permission. Anger flared hot, but I swallowed it, pacing the kitchen. If I let rage take over, I'd miss the details, and right now details were everything. I combed through the fine print, every line outlining liability, every number tying me to $20,000 I never agreed to contribute. My throat tightened. He had gone this far assuming I'd either cave or stay quiet once the ball was already rolling. That realization cut deeper than the forged paperwork itself. Caleb hadn't just gambled on a loan. He had gambled on me, on my loyalty, on my reluctance to cause waves, on the guilt he thought I'd carry if I said no. He was counting on me to fold the moment it became messy. As I stared at the documents, one thought crystallized. He hadn't made a mistake. This was intentional. And if I didn't push back, I'd be trapped in a deal I never agreed to join. I didn't give myself time to cool off. The papers sat in the passenger seat as I drove straight to Caleb's apartment, my grip tight on the steering wheel. By the time I knocked, I already knew he'd open the door with that smug, casual look he always wore when he thought he was 2 steps ahead. I held up the documents before he could say a word. Did you seriously tell a bank I'd co-sign without asking me? The question came out sharper than I intended, but there was no soft way to put it. He blinked, then gave a half laugh, waving his hand like it was nothing. Come on, Lena. It's just paperwork. They needed a second name on file. You wouldn't actually be on the hook. You're overthinking it. His tone only fueled my anger. I shoved the papers at his chest. Overthinking? They called me. They spelled it out. This isn't some harmless line on a form. They expect me to put down $20,000. Do you get that? That's not pretend. That's real money and legal responsibility. He tried again, voice oily with excuses. Relax. Once it all went through, I would have handled it. You wouldn't have to worry. I just needed a little help getting past the bank's requirements. That's how these things work. The more he talked, the more obvious it became. He'd convinced himself this was normal. But his story had holes big enough to drive a truck through. I cut him off, refusing to let him spin it. They were crystal clear. If I sign, I'm tied to the mortgage. If you can't pay, it's on me. Do you think I'm stupid? His mask slipped then, frustration twisting his face. He snapped, You're supposed to have my back. Family sticks together, but you'd rather leave me hanging. You've always thought you're better than me. I stood my ground, shaking but steady. No. What I won't do is let you gamble with my future, because you can't face your own mess. I'm not signing anything. That was the breaking point. His voice rose, words spilling out like venom. He accused me of betrayal, of turning against him when he needed me most. He shouted so loud the neighbor's dog started barking. For the first time, the line between us wasn't just a quiet divide. It was a chasm, and neither of us could pretend it wasn't there anymore. Caleb wasn't done, not by a long shot. Even after I made it clear I wouldn't sign, he pressed forward on his own, convinced he could somehow make it work. He met with the lender again, trying to push the application through without me attached. For a while I heard nothing. Then the updates started trickling in, each one worse than the last. The numbers didn't add up. His paychecks were inconsistent, his debts too heavy, and his history far from clean. The bank wouldn't overlook it, no matter how many times he tried to charm his way around the facts. Each inquiry left another mark, dragging his score lower. What little credit he had managed to keep intact was now in free fall. When the rejection became official, his fury found its way to me. He called, shouting so loudly I had to hold the phone away. He claimed I had destroyed his chance, that if I had just kept my word, he would already be moving boxes into his new place. He ranted about how I had no idea what it felt like to watch an opportunity slip away. I let him vent, but inside, the mixture of feelings was sharp and complicated. Part of me ached hearing the raw anger in his voice, knowing it was easier for him to blame me than to face his own mistakes. A tiny corner of my heart wondered if I should have handled things differently, if standing firm had somehow been too harsh. But stronger than the guilt was a quiet certainty. I hadn't created this disaster, and stepping in to fix it would have meant drowning alongside him. When the line finally went silent, I sat there gripping the phone, breathing slowly until my pulse calmed. He wanted me to feel responsible, to crumble under the weight of his failure. But the truth was written in the paperwork and the rejection letters, not in his accusations. His downfall had been set in motion long before I ever said no. I refused to let his rage rewrite reality. He could shout, he could sulk, he could even drag my name through the mud, but I would not step into the wreckage he created. That choice wasn't betrayal. It was survival. And as much as he wanted to cast me as the villain, deep down I knew the only person who had sabotaged Caleb's future was Caleb himself. Caleb pushed forward as though my refusal hadn't happened. He scheduled more meetings, signed more forms, and kept insisting he could pull it off alone. He carried himself like a man who believed determination could erase numbers on a balance sheet. But lenders deal in facts, not hope, and the facts weren't on his side. His wages were inconsistent, his debts stacked too high, and every new attempt only dug him deeper. The rejection didn't come as a surprise to me, but for him, it landed like a slap. Without a co-signer, the application collapsed. What he thought would be his big leap forward crumbled before it even began. Each failed attempt left scars on his record, pulling his score lower with every inquiry. By the time it was over, the damage was undeniable. That's when the calls started. His voice came through the line like a storm, filled with venom. He shouted that I had cost him his future, that if I'd just gone along, everything would have fallen into place. He painted himself as the dreamer cut down by my refusal, railing against me as if I were the obstacle rather than the safeguard he had tried to exploit. I listened jaw tight, every word twisting between anger and sadness. It hurt to hear the disappointment dripping from his accusations, but there was no part of me that believed his story. I hadn't destroyed anything, his own track record had. The numbers had spoken, and no amount of blame could change them. Still, after the shouting stopped, guilt lingered like an unwelcome shadow. I wondered if I had been too unyielding, if standing my ground had somehow pushed him into this collapse. Yet the truth was there in front of me. I hadn't set this chain of events in motion. I had only refused to be dragged into it. And alongside that guilt came a sense of clarity. Vindication. For once, I had chosen myself instead of carrying his chaos. I felt the weight of his words, but I refused to bend beneath them. He could rage all he wanted, but I would not surrender my stability to repair his recklessness. His downfall wasn't mine to claim, and I wasn't going to let him rewrite the story to make it so. The gathering at my aunt's house was supposed to be a routine family meal, but the air felt different the moment I walked in. Conversations dipped as I entered, eyes darting away, and I could tell whispers had been traveling long before I arrived. Plates clattered a little too loudly, laughter sounded forced, and the divide in the room was sharp enough to feel in my bones. Caleb arrived late, his face tight, shoulders squared like he was ready for battle. He barely greeted anyone before fixing his attention on me. With his voice pitched loud enough for the whole table to hear, he sneered. "You left me high and dry. Family's supposed to stand together, but you don't care about anyone but yourself." The room went quiet, forks pausing midair. I sat straighter, keeping my tone even. "You told a bank I'd back you without asking me. That's not support. That's fraud." The words dropped heavy, slicing through his attempt at theatrics. A couple of relatives glanced down at their plates, shifting uncomfortably. For a split second, I thought he might back off. Instead, his expression twisted, anger bubbling to the surface. He slammed his palm against the table, rattling silverware. His voice rose, breaking into a shout as he hurled accusations about betrayal, about me destroying his life, about how everyone would regret siding with me. Then came the moment that sealed it. He jerked to his feet so abruptly that his chair scraped harshly against the floor. His hand struck a glass, sending water spilling across the tablecloth and dripping onto the carpet. The crash echoed through the room, followed by stunned silence. No one moved as he stormed toward the door, muttering curses under his breath before slamming it behind him. The only sound afterward was the uneven clinking of dishes as someone shifted uncomfortably. My aunt tried to smooth things over with a weak laugh, but the tension clung to the room like smoke. I didn't need to say another word. His outburst had spoken louder than anything I could have added. For the first time, people saw past his excuses and charm. The spectacle he created carved a mark he couldn't erase, and though no one said it aloud, I could feel it, the story that would follow him long after the plates were cleared. His image had cracked, and everyone at that table had witnessed it. News of what happened at my aunt's table didn't stay there. By the end of the week, cousins, neighbors, even distant relatives had heard about Caleb's outburst. Whispers followed him everywhere, and the story of him knocking over a glass in rage became a shorthand for his volatility. People no longer saw him as wronged. They saw him as reckless. The impact spread quickly into his daily life. At work, he stopped meeting deadlines, stumbling through meetings, distracted and irritable. Rumors of his behavior leaked into the office, and his manager began keeping notes on every slip. His landlord, tired of late rent and noise complaints, pinned a warning notice to his door. What used to be small indulgences turned into mounting pressure, and his stability began to erode. Friends who once backed him started pulling away. Some quietly unfollowed him online, others stopped answering his calls. A few outright told him they couldn't be associated with someone who would corner his own sister into financial ruin. That cut deeper than he admitted, but his pride kept him from owning the truth. Through it all, I stayed composed. I went to work, paid my bills, kept my life moving forward. But inside, the label my mother threw at me lingered. To her, I was still the selfish one, the sister who refused to help. Her voice carried into family conversations, painting me as the reason for Caleb's spiral. We didn't fight outright, but the space between us grew colder. Phone calls felt shorter, meals together stretched thin with unspoken tension. I knew she still held out hope I'd rescue him, and I knew I never would. That quiet fracture, heavier than all the gossip, became the part one carried, the cost of choosing my boundaries over her approval. I didn't have to plot or scheme. The sweetest form of payback was doing nothing at all. Caleb kept digging deeper, one excuse after another, while I quietly stepped aside. Each time he tried to lean on someone new, they pulled away. The bridges he thought would always be there collapsed behind him, and I didn't lift a finger. His reputation became the warning parents whispered to their kids. Don't trust someone who'll gamble with family loyalty. Creditors flagged his name. Relatives stopped inviting him to gatherings. The label of unreliable clung to him tighter than any stain he'd ever earned before. Meanwhile, I chose peace. I redirected every ounce of energy I might have wasted fighting him into building something for myself. After years of saving, I signed papers for a modest condo, a space that was mine alone, bought on my own terms. The keys in my hand felt like more than property. They were proof I could rise without dragging anyone down. It struck me the bitter symmetry. The dream Caleb tried to secure with deception was the very thing he lost, while I built it piece by piece through honesty and patience. He spiraled, and I flourished. That was my quiet revenge, not shouting, not proving a point, but living the life he pretended he deserved while his lies caught up with him. Family wounds cut the deepest. I never imagined my own brother would gamble my trust for his gain, yet that's exactly what happened. The ache wasn't just about the loan or the lies. It was about realizing the brother I thought I had never really existed. I grieved that loss in silence, not because he was gone, but because I had to accept who he truly was. The version of him I defended at holidays, the one I told myself just needed a break, was nothing more than wishful thinking. The truth was uglier, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Months later, another family dinner came around. Laughter echoed, plates passed, but beneath it all, the whispers lingered. Caleb's name was never spoken outright, yet everyone knew the story. His eruption had marked him more than any of my refusals ever did. He didn't show. Whether out of shame or stubborn pride, I couldn't say. What I did know was this: he remained bitter, circling the same drain he dug for himself. I no longer carried his burden. For me, the closure wasn't loud. It was steady resolve. I would never again be cornered by guilt or obligation. He wanted permanence and belonging, but his own deception cost him both. That, in itself, was the quietest and sharpest revenge. Do you think I was right to walk away from Caleb's manipulation, or should I have given him another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.